Henry, the co-owner of Freddy's, the one who created the animatronic characters we've come to know and love, and the one who led them all back one last time to end everything in a fire, hoping they would all be forgotten. But where was he all that time in between? Why not try to stop it sooner? Well, I think I finally know. Hi, I'm Nervous, and since the release of the interactive novel the week before, I have been fixated on this story and its main character, Ralph, aka the phone guy. The fierce and misplaced loyalty he has for his job at Freddy's, the way he will do anything to protect his daughter, and also his unreliable memory. If you haven't seen my last two videos about the week before and Help Wanted, the Tales story, then consider watching them before continuing this. I will do my best to keep things in line for you regardless, but it's no coincidence that those two in particular precede this video. As I read this newest FNAF story, I started to make connections between Ralph and some other key characters in the FNAF-verse, and by the end of it, I came to the conclusion that Fazbear Entertainment is a monkey's paw. If you've never heard of the monkey's paw, you're probably very confused. If you need a short summary, I've got you covered. If not, skip ahead to the next chapter. The Monkey's Paw is a short story written in 1902 by author W.W. Jacobs, and if you have the time, I'd even encourage you to read it yourself. But in short, it is about a couple and their working-age son who come into possession of a literal monkey's paw that is able to grant 3 wishes. But they are warned to never use it, as a previous owner used his 3rd wish to ask for death. The father wishes for £200 to pay off their house, believing this to be a small and sensible wish. The next day, a man comes to inform the couple that their son was caught in the machinery at work and is now dead. The company offers the couple £200 to help them through the loss of their son. The mother demands her husband use the monkey's paw to wish their son back to life, and after much resistance, he does just that. Later that night, there was a knock at the door. Their son had arisen from the dead and walked from the graveyard to their home. The mother wants to answer the door and see her son, but her husband begs her not to. She runs for the door, and he runs for the paw. He makes his final wish, and the knocking stops. Now, I say Fazbear Entertainment is a monkey's paw, but truly, the entire franchise, from the games, to the books, to the other books, to the movie, all keep this same energy throughout. I would venture to say nearly every story features a person wishing for something, out loud or silently, and they receive it, but at a horrible cost. The lesson meant to be learned by the monkey's paw is that people's lives are bound to their fate, and it is wrong to try to interfere. And Five Nights at Freddy's is born from someone or someones trying to do just that. Whether you believe William wanted to bring Dave, aka the crying child, back out of love, rage, or just to maintain some sense of control, the line, "I will put you back together," very much insinuates he intends to do just that. And in the books, Henry succeeds in making robot versions of his kidnapped and killed daughter, Charlie. William's daughter, Elizabeth, dies in a horrible accident, and Michael puts her back together. Not to mention, Curse of Dreadbear literally features a Frankenstein bear evoking these images of reanimation. We may not agree on much in this franchise, but we all agree that there has been an attempt at some point to bring a dead child back to life. Another thing I want us to be able to agree on is that illusions play a large role in the FNAF franchise, tricking the senses into seeing and hearing things as the puppet master wants them to be seen and heard. Sound illusion discs have been used throughout the series at various times. Fazbear Frights introduces the concept of an illusion necklace powered by Remnant. The Tales story Didophobia introduces illusion gas, and there have been instances of illusion lights being utilized. Last but not least, the entire concept of AR and VR technology so advanced that people cannot distinguish reality from fiction allows me to feel quite confident that creating and trapping someone in a realistic illusion is quite possible within the realm of FNAF. All of this to say, I think I know why Henry disappears for so long. He is lost in an illusion. He wished on the monkey's paw. And here's the thing, FNAF has basically told us this more than once, but we really had trouble accepting that the illusions at work in the franchise's books could possibly be as powerful in the game timeline. I'm guilty of it myself. Something about the games feels more rooted in the reality we are familiar with, potentially because of how much we interact with them. But later games have made it very clear we should not believe everything we see. So let me enlighten you on how many times creator Scott Cawthon has wanted us to see Henry's plight, but really wanted us to figure it out for ourselves rather than tell us straight out. I'll start with the Silver Eyes books. But first, a quick announcement. I'm going to be uploading bonus videos every Sunday throughout the month of October of edited down footage of my Into the Pit gameplay. Oh my gosh! A friend of mine has edited it to completely enhance the viewing experience. Toast, you are so magnificently in the way right now. So I hope you'll take the time to enjoy them as a little treat. Okay, now from this ad break to another brief ad break, unless you have YouTube Premium or an ad blocker. And then back to the video. I really appreciate ID's Fantasy coming out and saying that while Cawthon initially said not to use these books to solve the lore, that statement was made before the story of the games was meant to continue. We have seen time and time again that the Silver Eyes trilogy does have a number of very specific instances where themes, names, and characters appear in the games, and we even saw people using the Silver Eyes trilogy to predict things that would happen in sister location.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
Ah! Yeah! Nailed it already! Ow. Sorry, I'm really enthusiastic about that.
However, for today, all we need to take away from the books is the way Henry reacts to losing one of his two children. The Silver Eyes trilogy is the best source of information we have on Henry, and while I do not believe he successfully created the lifelike Charlie bots that exist within those books, I do believe he is the kind of person who would be completely destroyed mentally by the loss of his child. And when we really examine the story of Henry as revealed in those books, we learn that he created the illusion discs, inflicting the frequencies upon himself to live in a world where he could be convinced he never lost his daughter. And that brings me back to Ralph and his story from the week before. Ralph is what I would call Henry coded. He's a single father with a young daughter whom he loves very much. He has a long history with Freddy Fazbear's, has an affinity for the animatronics, and seems overly trusting of his employers despite what he seems to know. He even says he thinks he'd like to work with his hands more at his next job, going so far as to say it would be fun to make toys. What really started pointing me to look back at Henry, however, was his daughter's name, Coppelia. This is in reference to a ballet, wherein a doll maker has a lifelike doll he refers to as his daughter, whom he wants to bring to life using a living human's life force. Ultimately, he is not successful, and must accept that his daughter is just a doll. Likewise, Henry's delusions and forced illusions allowed him to believe Charlie was real, but he also had to come to terms with the truth. Furthermore, Coppelia is based on a short story called The Sandman, wherein the main character Nathaniel finds himself struggling to trust his own eyes in the same way Ralph and Henry do in their respective stories. Ralph questions his memory every time he leaves the pizza place, and Henry laments in a letter to his sister Jen that even if I did manage to turn off everything planted in the walls to deceive myself, I think my mind would deceive me still. Another through line between these three characters is that they all have women in their lives that they've pushed away somehow. Of course, all we know in Ralph's case is that Coppelia's mother is alive but not around, as one of the endings of the week before has Coppelia asking if her dad wants her to call her mom. However, both Nathaniel and Henry's partners are pushed away by their strange and off-putting behavior. They also both have this voice of reason trying to help them, Henry with Jen and Nathaniel with his lover, Clara. Now, I make all of these connections between Nathaniel and Henry to really drive home how intentional I believe it to be that we are introduced to these stories through Ralph and his daughter Coppelia. It caused me to ask myself two questions. 1. Is Ralph living in an illusion where his daughter is not a real child but a robot, and he is kept working at Freddy's by believing he needs the job to support her? And 2, is Ralph actually Henry? I had this first thought after, of course, looking into Coppelia and all that came along with it, but also because I'd recently read a Tales story that proved FNAF can and would do exactly that. Help Wanted is a story about Steve Snodgrass, a janitor hired as a game developer by Fazbear Entertainment. His dream was to make video games and have a family, and after meeting a woman for a date, he finds himself unconscious, waking up to the woman explaining they are married, with 2 children, and he has memory issues from a head injury. Steve is then tortured by nightmares while making video games for Fazbear Entertainment, and can't get this strange electronic ringing out of his ears. One day, he finds the source of the ringing, revealing he's been living in an illusion. His family are all robots, and he's basically been kidnapped and hidden away in this home by the company to get him to make these video games. At the end of the story, he's given the option to hit a button and resume the illusion. He chooses to push the button, but then his robot wife stabs him. Based on the information I presented in last week's video, I believe this story is canon to the game's timeline. And I do not believe it would be the first or last time Fazbear Entertainment would need someone to do something for them and make sure they got what they wanted, offering someone their deepest desires, only to use it against them. And here we are, back at that theme of offering someone the life they truly want and trapping them in it. We see it in Tales multiple times over, and even the Ruin DLC offers an ending where Cassie puts on the Vanny mask just before being caught by the Mimic, to live in an illusion of safety and being with Gregory over whatever horrors are taking place in the world around her. Michael from the FNAF movie also falls victim to this trap, a character I have also theorized is meant to represent Henry. The movie's story is twisted to have Golden Freddy offering Mike a lifetime of dreams where he can be with his brother again, who was kidnapped by William Afton when he was very young. Mike is overwhelmed with emotion and agrees in a moment of weakness to trade his sister Abby for an illusion of his brother Garrett. Over and over, we see characters willingly giving into an illusion, willing to live in a simulated but ideal world, oblivious to the truth. To me, it makes it very likely that Ralph could be a victim of something like this. We know his daughter is named after a lifelike but ultimately unalive doll. We know his memory is unreliable, saying in one part of the book that he brought his daughter to Freddy's when she was 7, but in another part saying he never brought her to Freddy's. We know he has a lot of knowledge about the pizza place being dangerous, including the more deadly stories, but also that he has a loyalty to the company that has kept him there for many years, and seemingly longer than most other employees. Can I say for certain that Ralph is being Steve Snodgrassed? No. But I can certainly provide enough evidence to believe it. But what about the second question? Is it possible that Ralph is Henry? Ralph canonically dies and seems to be stuffed into a suit at the end of his final week at Freddy's.
Hey, listen, I may not be around to send you a message tomorrow. It's been a bad night here for me. I always wondered what was in all those empty heads back there. You know. Oh no.
And while the FNAF timeline can be hard to follow at times, we can pretty safely assume that FNAF 6 Pizzeria Simulator, the game that almost certainly reintroduces Henry as a character, takes place after the events of FNAF 1. The game the week before is set the week before. So wouldn't that make it impossible for Ralph to be Henry? Could William or even Henry himself induce an illusion so powerful that Henry no longer remembers himself as Henry, but Ralph? And would people not recognize Ralph as Henry, one of the two founders of Freddy Fazbear's? I have answers to some of those questions, but certainly not all of them. And rather than spin you half a yarn just to come back around and say this, I just don't have enough evidence to prove such a thing could be possible at this time. I do believe that there is enough evidence, however, to firmly say that Ralph is, say it with me, a Henry parallel. Something we are far from unfamiliar with here in the FNAF community and specifically my channel. As I said in my week before video, this franchise contains stories within stories, and I am certain this story, as well as others, are pointing to Henry falling into a trap. Based on what we know about Henry from the way he speaks in FNAF 6, along with the way the other stories we've talked about today play out, here is what I find most likely. Though I will admit, there are a number of ways these events could have gone down. William loses his son and wants to rebuild him as a robot, so he approaches his business partner Henry with this strange request. Henry would refuse to help William, but would also be overly trusting of him and empathetic towards him. William now understands he would need to manipulate Henry to get what he wanted from him. He killed Henry's daughter to make him vulnerable, and then the rest would fall into place. Henry would not want to live in a world without his daughter, and William would offer him a world where they could be together. It's certainly possible that Henry brought the illusion upon himself, just like in the novels, but with the game universe so closely associating Afton Robotics with the illusion discs, and then the new Tales games furthering the use of illusion discs by Fazbear Entertainment, I feel it would be more likely that Afton would offer Henry a deal. Help him, and in return, Henry could see Charlie again. Now I know that there is a perfectly fine explanation that Henry disappeared because he was arrested after the missing children's incident, and all of my evidence is pulled from the books. But I want to make it clear that I'm not just picking books and stories at random to support my theory. I am choosing stories that have direct links to Henry and to the games themselves. Also, it's worth remembering that as of Help Wanted, it is stated that nothing was ever proven in a court of law. Meaning those old newspapers from FNAF 1 meant to stick with the phrasing of being charged with a crime rather than convicted. Or it was a jury trial, and while the defendant was found guilty, there was no hard proof presented, so Fazbear Entertainment still feels comfortable saying nothing was ever proven in a court of law. Alternatively, Henry could have been convicted, then appealed his case, and was eventually able to have the ruling reversed. And frankly, if you believe that's where Henry is, I think that's fair, because it's definitely been my thought process up until reading and analyzing these stories, particularly the week before. It forced me to go back and study the few ways Henry has been presented to us in this series, and how his grief made him capable of making destructively selfish choices. I think regardless of how exactly things played out, William needed Henry under his control and out of his way. And I believe he did that by creating an illusion he knew Henry wouldn't be able to refuse. And chances are, if Henry was trapped in some sort of illusion-based prison, he was likely being monitored by William. And if that was the case, it wouldn't be far-fetched to assume that there were vents leading directly to the sister location bunker. Perhaps when Baby is referring to someone having been there before, she is referring to Henry, having escaped his illusion.
There is a space under the desk. Someone before you crafted it into a hiding place, and it worked for him.
And that is when he discovered the depths of the depravity of the monster he had created. This would account for his absence and his inability to really intervene. It would keep Henry in the dark about what William was doing, but still attached to the company. I also think it makes it more believable that once Henry is out of the illusion, that he'd be able to have access to the funds and get the permits he'd need to build a new pizzeria. Additionally, it provides a motivation for Henry to turn the tables, designing his own trap for William, luring him in with the promise of something he wants, and finally, destroying him.
You are not here to receive a gift. You have all been called here, into a labyrinth of sounds and smells, misdirection and misfortune. A labyrinth with no exit, a maze with no prize. You don't even realize that you are trapped. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, friend.
But I want to know what you think. These are just my interpretations and thoughts about what these stories are trying to tell us, both old and new. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a thumbs up, and subscribe to become a part of the nervous system. Turn on bell notifications to theoretically be told when I post a new video or go live. I upload every week and go live on Wednesdays and Fridays. But if you can't wait, there are videos on the screen right now just for you. Okay, bye! We get to collect logs? Is this El Chips? Is this Chipper and Sons?